With the sweep of our scribe's pens comes the rumbling zoom of a fine, gleaming chopper, the deep maniacal laugh of a purple tentacle, the metallic ring of a pirate's cutlass. Where could we be but the Rob Room? The blog of the distinguished Mr. Rob Smith, chronicler of the history of perhaps the most famous producer of all things adventure, LucasArts, made manifest. For you see, in addition to having served as editor for PlayStation, the official magazine, Mr. Smith has the distinct claim to fame of having penned Rogue Leaders, a volume most glorious, capturing within its hallowed pages the exploits of an adventure game developer most venerable. It is thanks to our most honored guest that we possess such a work to allow us to look upon the memories of many a childhood all the more fondly for its existence, and it is here, now, that we are granted the undeniable honor of his company and conversation. So join us, Mr. Smith, and please accept our heartfelt welcome. A welcome, of course, to the Fanatarium.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this, our newest episode. Today we're going to be talking about something that's been a little controversial, we'll just put it mildly. We're going to talk about Star Wars games. We're going to talk about kind of what led us to where we are now. And to help me with this discussion, I have the author of Rogue Leaders, the history of LucasArts. I have Rob Smith, who's joining us for the second time to talk about his book and kind of where it ended and how that led to where we are now. So welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
And, you know, we had you on before. We were mostly talking about your book and the contents, the stories of LucasArts. And by that time, LucasArts had already been closed. But we didn't really talk about the end of LucasArts very much because we're mostly focusing on the stories of the classic games and, classic experiences and so on. But it seems, what brought down LucasArts ultimately, at least in the eyes of fans, seems to be exactly what's kind of bringing down EA's, hopefully, vision of Star Wars games now. You can kind of see this correlation of the fandom is kind of going downward when it comes to video games from, I don't know, Force Unleashed 2 probably, to where we are now, and it's kind of sad.
It's very sad. I mean, what Star Wars fan doesn't want more Star Wars games that are, high quality, AAA, and that's fundamentally where the problem comes in. They're expensive to make, and with what has been a history of, let's call it indecision, at a senior level, it's just been a sort of a rotating door of ideas and concepts, and then some of the fundamental sort of issues that LucasArts traditionally had, which always sort of seemed to be chasing the current vogue. Hey, that GTA game's popular, why don't we make an open world Star Wars game? Hey, that Call of Duty is popular, why don't we make a Call of Duty-like Star Wars shooter? And I think that's been a consistent theme throughout sort of the LucasArts time, and probably even since after the Disney takeover and the license out to EA.
And it seems like when LucasArts kind of did get ahead of the game for once, like Knights of the Old Republic, they rush out a sequel which doesn't do as well as they wanted it to, and then they kind of give up on it. And they did that multiple times when they finally got ahead of things.
There was that little window of, the sort of golden age where it was when Simon Jeffrey was president, and he said, well, who is the best RPG developer out there? BioWare. Okay, let's give them the license for that. Who's the best, one of the top shooter groups? Raven. Well, let's give them the license to do the shooter. And Sony Online for, the sort of first iteration of a MMO in the universe.
Of Galaxies, yeah. And then even, you can say when they did Force Unleashed, mostly in-house, that was them trying to do something new and unique, and it paid off. It was for a long time the most successful game they ever had, and then they pushed a sequel too quickly to kind of recoup those costs, and it never works. It never works when you push that too fast.
Somebody sometime is going to realize that.
Sometime. Not Activision right now, or Dice, or no, Dice might be. They're slowing down. Ubisoft kind of recognized it with Assassin's
Yeah,
Creed.
with Assassin's Creed, yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, the idea of the every year iteration, I think, is a challenging one because when you look at sort of if you want to be original, and gamers now expect so much content that one game can last easily more than a year. The sort of the business models around add-ons, microtransactions, all that kind of stuff. Um, you know, you buy a game today, you could easily be playing the same thing with whole new stuff over a year from now. And if that franchise slaps another game down, well, how different does it have to be to then appeal?
Yes, that's true. And even now with Activision, the newest Call of Duty was Battle Royale. There's no single player, nothing. It was a Battle Royale game, and it made money.
Well, yeah, I was working there, so it's a little
Yeah.
difficult for me
Yeah,
to
well,
say anything.
I'm just saying, like it pays off, and sometimes that frustrates people, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
But if everyone liked every single game, actually, we'd kind of get boring. I'd kind of get every game would be the same, and then we'd never get anything unique. But looking at at the way LucasArts worked, your book ended around 2000, if I recall, 2008, 2007 ish.
2007, yeah, I think it was like late 2007.
It was like Force Unleashed was being worked on.
Yeah. They also had another, I think it was called Team 3, working on another project that I don't believe was in the Star Wars universe. So at that time, they were looking to, there'd been a spirit of wanting to kind of recapture the golden age.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't all just Star Wars. But then a little aside for that final chapter of the book, actually, when I wrote it, I interviewed the president at the time, and I'd submitted my manuscript, and the book was in going through editing and in development. And he left, got fired, whatever, and a new president came in. So everything that he sort of attributed to his vision had to be re-edited to be generic. LucasArts decided to do this.
Yeah. That was the Jim Ward, Dustin
Jim
Frost,
Ward,
and Switch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So so yours ended right on time. Force Unleashed is being worked on, and I think the game you're thinking of is Fracture, about like
Yes.
dystopian United States, kind of like Homefront.
Yep.
And then of course after that one, so if people forget, the last, I could say quote unquote few, but the last 4 years of LucasArts, they had Clone Wars Jedi Alliance, Clone Wars Lightsaber Duels, Battlefront Mobile Squadrons, Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings, Tales of Monkey Island, the Telltale remake of it, and Secret of Monkey Island Special Edition, Star Wars: The Clone Wars Republic Heroes, Lucidity, which was a non-Star Wars game, Battlefront Elite Squadron, Lego Indiana Jones 2 Adventure Chronicles, Monkey Island 2 Special Edition, Force Unleashed 2, Lego Star Wars 3 The Clone Wars, Star Wars The Old Republic with BioWare, Connect Star Wars, Angry Birds Star Wars 1 and 2, Tiny Death Star, and they were working on Star Wars 1313 and Assault Squadron. That's in 4 years, and if you look at the last 6 years, it's like 2 mobile games and Battlefront 1 and 2. It's kind of a different thing, but it looks. But from what I understand, so you have experience working in the industry. LucasArts was not the richest by far developer, and a lot of developers like Activision and EA, they have multiple studios and a lot of money, so they kind of chuck money out there to make sure that these games come out, yearly by 3 different studios, and they get the money out there to make sure they actually get hit release dates and make sure that they have enough staff to actually get it done, or they close the studio if they don't think it's going to. It's Visceral and other ones. With LucasArts, they were kind of licensing it out to whoever had an idea to make a game, regardless of kind of quality control. Am I hitting that a little?
I'm not sure it's fair to say necessarily quality control, but yeah, you're absolutely right. But I mean, they were developing technology that internally that was, pretty good. And you look at 1313, the technology that was built for that then got used by the film studios for, special effects and sort of uh, cinematics and that kind of thing. So, the work that was going on inside there, I think was, yeah, I mean, there was certain passion within the developers to make great game. And I think that, this has been written about sort of before, but the sort of rotating door of presidents really sort of undermined a lot of those efforts. Because each new one would have a new idea, a new thought. And I think, what was it, 3 presidents in those 4 years?
3, and I think one only lasted a couple months, if I remember that.
Right.
And yeah, the rotating door definitely cannot help, because who gives the vision?
Right. I mean, if you only last 2 months, then that's because you've either seen something you don't like or trust, or they've seen something that they don't like or trust. And there's a good chance that whatever that was impacting development. And the number of sort of stories about, games in development suddenly pivoting to a different angle is pretty staggering.
Yeah, because think about it. When they revealed, for example, this 1313, because I saw that reveal, when they revealed it at Celebration, they admitted what you saw here. Those aren't the faces of people you're going to see. This isn't necessarily, like, this is a piece of the game, but it's not necessarily the final version of what you're going to see. And even then they had talked about how they had pivoted 1313 a bit from what the original was going to do, because for 1313 they actually got more resources available ultimately, because they got ILM, they got sound, they decided to all work together, and it sounded like they were trying to create the technology to do in-game cinematics and so on, so they didn't have to use people like Blur Studio, who they had used for Star Wars: Old Republic, Force Unleashed 2, and Arkham games use them and so on. They make great cinematics and great work on films, but they'd rather be able to do it in-house with ILM versus pay someone else.
Well, that's why the engine that they were, or parts of the engine that they created for 1313 did then get used by other parts of the organization to create cinematics. So they were obviously doing, quality work like that. And I was at E3 when 1313 was revealed, and, people were wowed by it. It was like, oh my God, this is great. And, it wasn't a great demo, but it suggested enough that, hey, we're going to get, an original game. I mean, yes, it was pulling different elements of certain sort of popular games that were out there, but it was certainly suggesting it was something a little bit different, a little bit special.
And to put people in perspective, for the previous 4 years, since The Force Unleashed, which for the most part was highly successful and people really enjoyed it, we had gotten Clone Wars games, which were mediocre at best for many people. We had gotten Monkey Island remakes and so on, which people enjoyed, but they're sort of a niche. They aren't like wildly successful. You had Lucidity, which I don't remember at all, which probably says a lot, because I played it. I don't remember it. You had a mobile Battlefront game, which was not or DS, sorry, handheld, which did not go over very well. You had Lego games, which have their niche, people like, and did pretty well. You had Force Unleashed 2, which was generally considered disappointing by many people, especially because how long and kind of unfinished it was. Yep. And then you had Star Wars: The Old Republic, which, though at the time was, I think it had the record for the most expensive game ever made, was launched. We've had a lot of people on the show. It was launched in a state where they weren't ready to call it done. They didn't actually get to the point where they wanted to launch it until they released the Hut expansion and so on, where that's how they wanted it to start, with content-wise. Now, of course, it's still going. It's the only part of Legends that's still actually going in the Star Wars universe. And BioWare did that one, but it was launched and people were generally disappointed. I don't know why I put hundreds and hundreds of hours in it, but people were generally disappointed. Connect Star Wars, people thought had a lot of potential. Came out, they saw Yoda and Han Solo dancing and didn't get the
Oh,
joke and ran to the hills.
yeah.
Angry
Oh,
Birds is
Connect.
Angry Birds. Tiny Star Wars, a tiny Death Star wasn't supposed to be that big, and so like there was kind of a stack of disappointment, disappointment, disappointment. And 1313, everyone had their hopes on that it wouldn't do that. They put everything into one game.
Yep.
And I,
That's the nature of the AAA.
yeah,
And all the other games. I mean, with the exception of Old Republic, which yeah, I too have hundreds of hours invested in. All the others were, let's get something out that's going to hopefully pay for another month of development on Old Republic or 1313 or whatever, just to try and keep the motor going, as it were.
and I think I saw the cracks appearing in fandom, to kind of where we are now, where it's stupidly divided. I'm just, I don't like how divided they are. And when 1313 was shown at Celebration, they showed the demo. People were really excited. They got people lining up for questions. And the very, very first question is kind of like what happened with Diablo Immortal recently. The very first question was, how long is this game going to be? Is it going to be short like you gave us with Force Unleashed 2? And they said, we're aiming to have a decent campaign of about 8 to 9 hours. And the guy went, oh, and just walked out. And the room just kind of deflated. And I think people were expecting like a 30-hour or something. I don't know how long people want games to be. There's some people that tell me the game should be 1 hour for every dollar you're spending, which seems kind of ridiculous for how, not every game needs to be Dragon Age or Skyrim.
Well, and the industry has shifted so much in the business models that shape those decisions. And when you look at, the game I worked on, like Black Ops 4, and the sort of commentary in the community about no single-player campaign, so what does that mean? It means I'm getting less game. Well, you're really not, because between all the modes that are available, there is a ton of game there. But it's just that sort of perception of what it is that you should get for each dollar you're spending. And that's why I think so many different business models have been tried with all these games of expansions, MTX, all those little details, because games are really, really expensive to make, and AAA games are phenomenally expensive to make.
And for people looking at this, like, because we can look at games, like games I like that have come out recently. Like, there's a really big mix of types of games. Like, I look at, say, Pillars of Eternity, which is made as Obsidian's kind of like, let's hope we get this right before we die, and they got it right. And the other part of Microsoft, that game was mostly crowdfunded. Oh, not mostly, but chunk was crowdfunded, and it has a much less budget. But then you look at games like, say, Final Fantasy 15, where they spent who knows how much money, 10 years, and they clearly just got done whatever they could get done, because if you've ever played it, you're halfway through and then you're like, wait a second, did they lose money? Did they run out of money? Because halfway through and suddenly it's no longer open world, it's very linear, and you go very, very, follow a very, very set path. These games cost tons and tons of money, so I'm curious, so as someone who works in the industry, what accumulates a lot of the cost? Like, one of the things I was thinking of is, kind of like I saw this with the movie industry, like for example, when Green Lantern, they couldn't finish the effects in time, so they added like $25 million to the budget at the very last month and hired tons of people just to finish it. Does that sort of thing happen in the game industry too, where they just have to hire tons of people to get the game done on their deadline? Or is it just they have too many, they have lots of people working on it? Or how does this accumulate so much? Or is it just like, for example, with Square, where they just buy new engines and invent a new engine every time they do a game for some reason?
Well, I mean, you can take a studio of, studios now are what, 200, 300, 400 people, and have those people working on one project, and I think that's how you end up with a a Square situation of taking 10 years. Other games that are, in organizations like EA and Activision, etc., they have, a core team working on core parts, but then they'll parcel out different aspects to other teams, and so the actual total headcount of a AAA game now is hundreds, and that's not cheap.
Okay. So it's kind of like when you look at a movie and you say, okay, visual effects on my ILM, and then 9 other studios that like pile in underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I was working in the industry, with with Assassin's Creed Black Flag, and so they've got their studio in Montreal who are making it, but the studio sort of water effects and boat parts was in Singapore.
Wow.
So you add, you've got what 300 people. I don't know. I'm guessing 300 people in Montreal working on the core game, and then you've got a couple of hundred people. Again, I'm guessing, in Singapore working on this other part, and they're all sort of communicating together to put it together. But if my numbers are accurate, that's 500 people right there. You might have a different studio doing the cinematics. Well, how many people was that? And with the size of the game, one of the biggest things is the art assets needed. And so you just need, I mean, look at the credits of any AAA game. And nobody does, but, if you chose to, you look at sort of art, animation, those kind of things, and it's just streams and streams of names. And, head count is not cheap. And going back to sort of, LucasArts, they didn't have the will to put in that investment for games like 1313 that could potentially sort of reignite the fan base to prove that LucasArts was serious about making a high quality AAA game.
And I am going to bring this up because someone is going to mention it. Okay, while EA themselves have only released 2 Star Wars games since they got the license, a couple mobile ones too, but that's done a little bit. Battlefront 1 and 2. We have gotten other Star Wars games since Disney took over. So we've gotten BattlePod, the arcade, which is awesome. We've gotten one Lego game for The Force Awakens. I'm not sure why we haven't gotten other ones. I really don't know what happened there because it seemed like they were going pretty healthy, but we haven't gotten another one since, so we probably aren't. We've gotten mobile games such as Assault Team, Commander, Galactic Defense, Galaxy of Heroes, Force Arena, Uprising, Heroes Path, and Rebels Recon missions. Many of these, last for about a year, maybe 2, then they end them. We've gotten a Phantom Menace iOS something. I never heard about this one. We have some Disney.com games with Rebels, Ghost Raid, and Rebel Strike. So we had Disney Infinity 3.0, which was supposed to actually be part of the newest Wreck-It Ralph movie, which is why if you've seen Wreck-It Ralph, Ralph Breaks the Internet, there's a whole world they go to that was supposed to be Disney Infinity, hence why the figures and people in Star Wars stuff looked like the Disney Infinity figures, but Disney Infinity 3.0 was the last one they did, and then they killed that line. But so we have gotten other games for Star Wars. Just EA hasn't done a lot, done as much as we thought. Even EA, technically speaking, EA owns BioWare. BioWare has been working on Star Wars: The Old Republic this whole time in Austin, the studio that people forget exists.
Yep.
BioWare Austin's still there. They're still working, so they have been doing stuff. They have been throwing money at this. But I think people focus on the canceled games like, First Assault was a LucasArts one, 1313, and then Outpost, Attack Squadrons, Battle of the Sith Lords, whatever Visceral's game was called, whatever the game that they changed the Visceral game to be was called, and whatever the one that EA Vancouver was working on was going to be called. The whole game's just been shifted 4 times, I want to say 3 or 4 times, and that's what people seem to be focusing on. But there has been stuff that they have done, just not really the AAA titles outside of Battlefront.
This is my pure speculation, but I think that one of the big challenges with the Star Wars franchise as an entertainment brand right now is Disney's desire to make all of the pieces integrate. So you've got a movie coming out every year. With the original Battlefront, part of it, part of the sell was the reveal of, hey, you get to see this part that's, offset from the movie. But all of the dots between movies, games, books, comic books, the entire gamut of entertainment, they're wanting to, and again, I speculate, they're wanting to integrate all of them so that, there's this whole universe could be spread out between them. And so that's why, when a lot of the games, part of the sell is, oh, this tells the story between this movie and this movie. And that integration, I think, has probably become so complex that contributes to the various pivots, whether that's, and the pivots have largely been gameplay design focused, to my knowledge, but also, well, hey, we want to put this in this space to tell to bridge this story, and I can't imagine how complex that process has now become.
Well, I agree, definitely. And, if you look at it, because before, yeah, all those LucasArts games were kind of a what if. What if this happened? A lot of the, here's your experience flying a TIE fighter. Here's a story that goes with it. It could fit if you wanted it to. And then even Force Unleashed, that was, sold as this is a tale from George Lucas about Darth Vader's secret apprentice. It's canon, kind of, if you want to.
Right.
And because George Lucas was never really, that set on games or books being canon. It's canon if you wanted to, kind of, if he silly decides otherwise. And people were kind of expecting that. All these were all what if games. And I think I agree with you where they want to make it all canon, but the problem is that also limits where they could go, because until they've created the canon for a certain area, it's really hard for a game just to go run wild with it. Like if the
Right.
Knights of the Old Republic, a lot of people really want Knights of the Old Republic 3. Technically the Old Republic is what Knights of the Republic like 3, 4, and 5. They really want it, but if they really want to insist they make it all canon, they either have to reboot it, or they'd have to somehow make it fit. And from what I understand, with Disney's relationship with video game makers for a decade now, they don't play nice with a lot of video game makers. Hence why they buy studios and close them a lot. And Disney games come out and then they close out. It just seems like Disney doesn't... Disney with video games is kind of like Nintendo with online gaming. They try, and it works well sometimes, but they don't quite know what they're like, how to hash it out completely with everything else that's working. And it seems to, I imagine it's probably extremely frustrating with EA whenever they have all these games having to work with that, because they're constrained to whatever timeline they're given and whatever characters they're given. But at the same time, how do you make a game that works in that one? And what if Disney changes their mind and pivots? You have to pivot,
Right.
and that's expensive. You've already spent who knows how much money on this.
Yeah, I think that's the huge challenge sort of going forward is where do you want these things to fit? Do you have to wait for the next movie to to work on this? And I know inside Lucasfilm, you're not allowed to pitch ideas because it's just got so complicated. But when you look at something like Rogue One, how did they get the Death Star plans? That sort of makes sense. Could a story like that have been a game?
I honestly thought we'd yet have gotten something, like even Lego. But I don't know what happened. Like you might know this one. Like okay, EA had an exclusive license for 10 years.
Mhm.
How did the Lego license work? Is that just like worked on like as a separate thing that they already had existing, or is it something along the lines of Lego has an idea, can we do this, and it's kind of a back and forth? It just seems to be a kind of a plus Lego doesn't care about canon. Why? They just have fun with what they want.
Yeah, that's got to be between Disney and Lego on how they've structured that, and whether there's a when you're working with the EA, yes, you can do some of the smaller games, but really working with EA, you want Battlefront, you want Battlefront 2, um, and so those sort of, and I think that's where the complicated nature of the relationship between Disney, uh, the LucasArts sort of brand of game, um, EA, and then all of these other ones. I mean, how many games you listed off was kind of crazy. Um, I think that's where the sort of complicated hodgepodge of ideas um, results in a sort of reticence to be quite as dynamic and original and uh, as the audience would really like. I mean, yes, we'd love a Knights of the Old Republic, but the investment in that game is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars. Well, that's a movie.
And unless there's something to springboard off of to get the fans that don't know what Knights of the Old Republic is, how do you tie it?
Yeah, I mean, and the longer it goes on, the longer you've got an emerging audience of gamers that, as you just say, don't sort of necessarily appreciate the legacy.
And then if you look at it, like okay, just look at the reactions fans had to the Last Jedi not doing what they expected it to do. I personally loved the movie, but a lot of fans expected it to do something and it didn't, and they got really hurt by that. Imagine what would happen if EA made a Knights of the Old Republic, but had to follow canon, so they had to reboot it. Reboot from 1, 2, and the Old Republic and create a new game with a new storyline. Maybe reusing some characters. Even Revan was going to be. They tried to work him into the Clone Wars and so on. Maybe reusing some characters, but having to reboot it. Can you imagine the stink that would rise through the internet as
Yeah,
soon as they said that?
yeah. I mean, there's always going to be. I mean, on the one hand, you're going to say, okay, let's see what they do. Let's see what they pull off here. And on the other hand, you've got the internet.
And the internet is something that has. It seems almost like after Battlefront 2, EA is almost scared to talk about Star Wars games at all. Like there's a game coming out by Respawn, which hopefully they're going to show something soon because it's supposed to come out soonish, maybe, possibly. But it's almost like they're afraid to even mention anything about it, lest the internet sandbox will attack them before they're ready to show anything or something. And that's weird because I'm used to Star Wars games being like, oh yeah, we're working on a Star Wars game. It's gonna be awesome. It might have Boba Fett, rah! And everyone will start cheering. And it won't have Boba Fett when they show the trailer, but everyone's still happy because they teased us. But seems to be very tight-lipped now, almost almost afraid to advertise a AAA game, which is supposedly
I don't think that that's
okay.
EA. I think that that's
Okay.
Disney. I mean, I don't know, but I would highly suspect that is Disney because for the reasons that I mentioned earlier about sort of all these integrations. If Respawn comes out and says, "Hey, we've got this game that does this," well, where does it fit? And therefore, hey, everybody on the internet, speculate about all these other pieces. So
I'm almost. Hopefully, you don't actually know, but I'm almost half suspecting that that they're not going to talk about Respawn's game until Galaxy's Edge comes out at Disneyland, Disney World, because they even have comics tied into that one. I have a feeling that planet might be tied into some future things that we'll see.
I I have absolutely no idea.
Neither does anyone else.
Right.
But
Right.
I think that does make sense because I'm used to EA bragging about games all the time. Sometimes they do what Square and others do, where they talk about a game way too early.
Yep.
But they talk about games all the time. How long did they talk about the Old Republic before it actually came out?
Yeah.
Years.
I mean, yeah. And some of that is, um, I mean, knowing explicitly what the vision is. Um, you just mentioned the Boba Fett. Well, they were LucasArts was working on a bounty hunter game with generic bounty hunter until George did his review and said this needs to be Boba Fett. All of a sudden, it kind of changes the dynamic. And so until because of the changes and the pivots of design and the pivots of story, until you're locked down, I think it's very difficult to talk about and denounce. And because the universe is so talked about, any hint, if you say, "Oh, we're doing this," and you get a bunch of people going, "Yay, yay," and then all of a sudden, for some reason, it changes, you're just going to get a ton of grief for doing that. If you announce something and everybody says, "Oh, well, this is terrible," they might have to say, "Well, this is the course we're on. Deal." So there's a very difficult, communication of that is very complex from within this organization and universe that is so vast now.
I see. Yeah, I can definitely see that. And of course, there's another aspect that a lot of people forget. We mentioned how expensive games are, but it's not always necessarily that game itself is as expensive as that, but the game also has to carry the weight of all the canceled games before it to pay the bill. Like, for example, a lot of Nintendo fans yesterday cried out in horror and sadness when they announced that Metroid Prime 4, or whatever you want to call it, they had to restart it. They didn't like what Namco Bandai was doing, and they flushed it and restarted it with Retro. Now Retro's game has to bear that cost as well when they sell it to recoup that, plus their own budget what they put into it, because that's a cost that Nintendo spent. And with EA, these games, they've canceled them, but some of them have been, as far as I understand, pretty far in development. Like some of those ones, I think it was the Assault one, that was in
Yeah,
beta,
First Assault.
or first, yeah,
Yeah.
and then there was the fighter one that was in beta. People tested it, and then they flushed it. They have to
Yep.
recoup those costs somehow, and so that gets added on to the expectation of the next game, which isn't necessarily fair, but it's reality.
And I think that's what makes sort of the bean counters really nervous about, what the investment should be. When a game can cost to develop as much as a movie can, and you're almost guaranteed to make $1 billion on a movie. You're not guaranteed to make $1 billion on a game. You might, but what if? Well, I mean, yeah. What if a movie flops? Well, Star Wars is still gonna make
merchandise alone will save
money.
your butt.
Right. But a game is, I think, a riskier proposition if you're spending, $300-400 million making it.
Especially since, if you think about, if you spend $300 million just to, or say the Old Republic, $200 million was the price tag at launch. They've put 7 years more work into that game with expansions, and they're paying people for 7 more years. A smaller team, albeit, but they're paying people for 7 more years. So then it's also a continued cost to add on to the game, add DLC and support it and make sure that the servers are on. How long do you continue paying that until it's no longer worth it as well? Because that might be 200 million at launch, but like I'm quite sure right now the Old Republic's probably 500 million or thereabouts, because it's been 7 years of spending money on it and doing sizable changes.
Well, one of the quirks of the games industry that as opposed to the movie industry, is nobody really knows how much a game costs to make. It's one of these sort of dirty little secrets. There's speculation, of course, and analysts with public companies might give some suggestions, but the actual economics of game development very much sort of under wraps, always have been. With a movie, it's well known. This movie cost $200 million to make, plus marketing dollars, it made this much. And those numbers are much more sort of out in the open. It's just not the case with video games. So all you can do is sort of speculate. And, I've worked in the industry over 20 years, and I have no idea exactly how much any game cost to make.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, people, just don't talk about it. The details of contracts between, and when you're dealing with, we were saying earlier about multiple studios working on a single game, all dotted around the world. I can't even fathom the economics of those various deals. And then you've got sort of, if it's an external developer, you've got milestones. You've got what if you miss a milestone, penalties. What are your bonuses if you knock it out of the park? There are all these sort of vagaries within the economics of development that make it an industry secret that I assume a cabal of CFOs at various companies know, but there's never been a story in the press really that delves into how much a game costs to make, because the information is just really not available.
And yeah, and I can definitely see that. And just I was thinking, judging from what we've been talking about, how this is all supposed to fit in the canon, and Disney, they have to by design be involved. They have to make sure the story fits. One of the big things that fans have been screaming about is, strip the license, give it to anyone else. And while I can see, the fantasy of, okay, what if Rockstar made a game? What if, Telltale came back to life and made a Star Wars game? All these different people. I highly doubt it'd be any easier for any other studio to do it, because one advantage LucasArts had is they were part of the company. They were there. Those people worked on Star Wars movies, so they knew how to make it fit, but they weren't required to, but they knew how to do it. All these other studios, I don't think any other studio would necessarily have any easier way to do it at all, because they all have to still work within the same constraints. But the difference is EA's been working on it for years, and so at least they know what the constraints are, versus say you give it to Take-Two, and Take-Two will suddenly have to learn those themselves. And so I imagine you'd have a slew of canceled games to start with before they ever do anything, because you have to learn how it works.
Yeah, I think it'd be really, really difficult. And I suspect that is at the heart of why we haven't seen more of the AAA games coming out. There's the economics, there's the politics, there's the current vogue, design kind of ideas. How much can you give away if you're starting a game today? You've got to assume a 3-year development cycle. Well, what's going to be going on sort of at the movie end in 3 years?
Who knows right now? Good grief.
Right. Exactly. So, I also suspect that, Disney's a little nervous about sort of having that conversation and saying, okay, we understand it's going to take 3 years to make this next game. This is what we've got in 3 years. This is where, we think it should fit, and sort of open the kimono to external developers, one of which might have a loud mouth.
Yeah, leaks. Yep. Loose lips sink ships. Sink starships.
Sync franchises.
And one thing I can also see with this is EA is a very big company. they have lots of studios, they have lots of games, and the way these work is, they build on each other. So a game has to be successful to help fund the next one and fund the next one. So if one of their big AAA games in the meantime underperforms, that affects everything else in the pipeline because that money that was supposed to be there is no longer there. I don't actually know if it made or lost money. I know critically it disappointed, even though I quite liked it. But Mass Effect Andromeda, for example, that sent ripples through BioWare, like to its very core. And
Definitely.
they, had to close a studio down. They had to like shift people to work on Anthem, and then Motive went to work on Battlefront 2. They had to shift people around because that game did not do as well as they were hoping.
Right.
And Anthem's coming out really soon, so that's clearly EA's big focus right now. Just get that game done and launch it well. No freaky bugs.
Right.
Make it work, and then move on to the next one. But the reality is these studios don't have a ton of capital necessarily, and so if a game that costs hundreds of millions doesn't do as well as they wanted it to, that capital's gone. Famously, I remember Squaresoft, after Final Fantasy, I want to say it was after Final Fantasy X, so they had tons of money. They did that movie, Spirits Within, with all their capital, and it bombed so badly it almost killed the studio because it was gone.
Yeah. Yep. No, I was going to bring up that the Square movie because you've got that potential to put a lot of people out of work, and I think with Andromeda undermine a powerful brand. For the longest time, BioWare could do no wrong. It was the sort of stamp of approval. And then all of a sudden, a game doesn't perform so well, and it's like, well, the next game, it's not quite here's the next great BioWare game. It's here's the next BioWare game. Let's hope it's not, it does better than Andromeda.
Yeah, I can just imagine how scared CD Projekt Red is right now because they have their Cyberpunk game coming out, which has been in development for so long, and they've been restarted it at least once. People have stolen the assets from it, try to hold it hostage. Like their reputation's based off of 3 games right now. This could break it.
Well, I mean, it's happened to it's a recurring theme throughout the industry. You look at a company like Crytek. They sort of went through this after sort of being a bit of a darling developer. Their technology was, the leading edge of, visuals and all that kind of stuff. But then you have a couple of misses, and all of a sudden there's lawsuits and God knows what else that make it, very difficult. And that's why, making games is, fundamentally, making games is really hard. Making games successful is even harder. And, where the Star Wars brand is now within sort of the core gamer community, there's no expectation at AAA level that it's going to be a slam dunk.
No, and I don't think there was expectation even with Lucas. Like, how many true slam dunk AAA titles did LucasArts ever make? Like, Force Unleashed, generally.
Yep.
Knights of the Old Republic with BioWare. Yep. The TIE Fighter simulations. And then Rogue Leader.
Rogue Leader,
and
yeah.
Shadows of the Empire some, and Pod Racing game was much better than anyone thought it was ever going to be.
Oh, absolutely. And I probably shouldn't say this, but gambling on it when you're playing with your friends was just awesome.
That's yes. And I think one aspect that bring up before we start wrapping up is I don't think game developers really know what's going to be a big hit next year or what's going to be a big hit this year. Because if you look at history, for example, Blizzard cancels an MMO Titan, releases it as this weird, quirky arena shooter thing, Overwatch, with really no story if you actually play the game, and it becomes a huge hit. It doesn't make sense because it was different than everything you've ever had. Makes no sense. PUBG releases one level of a battle royale. People swarm to one level, which for me, like if you're a person who's obsessed with spending lots of money on games and content wise, one level, really? And then that goes crazy, and then Fortnite adds battle royale to an already existing game.
I mean, if I was going to mention Fortnite because I mean, the first time it was shown and it was not the battle royale mode, and people were just, I remember the presentation, and this is epic, and we're looking at this game, and people were actually glancing at each other, going, "Does this look as sucky as I think it does?"
Yes.
And then they introduced battle royale and make billions of dollars.
They print
literally.
money, literally. And then you look at games like, say, a AAA game like Grand Theft Auto 5. Most AAA games make a lot of their money in the first couple weeks, and then they have a life after that one. But Grand Theft Auto 5 has been in the top 10 selling games for 6 years now. Every month. How? No one knows how. It just is. And like being able to predict things like this is near impossible. Nintendo makes Splatoon. There's nothing telling you that game would have been as successful as it was for a system like the Wii U, but it was. There's some sure things like Star Wars Battlefront. It's pretty much a sure thing because shooters have never gone out of style. They're not. We have Call of Duty, we have Battlefront, we have Battlefield, we have all these games. It's not going to go away. It's always going to have a core audience. Like I'm surprised you haven't made a Star Wars like sports game just because people will play it. Or a racing game, like Swoops.
I don't know. I mean, I would go back to Masters of the Terraria to suggest that let's make a fighting game, and you end up something
EA
like that.
has the sports license. Like they make sports games all the time. Like I can see them making like Blood Bowl, but a Star Wars version. But it's really hard to see what will hit and what won't, because if you look at the biggest hits of the last few years, it makes no sense why Fortnite would be as big as it is, or PUBG, or Overwatch, or even Grand Theft Auto. Well, Grand Theft Auto 5 we knew would be big, but like it's the biggest entertainment product ever made. How?
I would suggest that part of it is the addition of GTA Online really sort of added legs to that. I mean, as much as you can play in that world solo as much as you like. What they did with and have evolved with online has really kept that game alive and going. And I think the other factor that we haven't mentioned is the power of the influencer.
Indeed.
That has now become, I mean, so crazy important. I mean, you take people like Ninja, and they are the people that are kind of shaping the industry. They're shaping sort of what it is that they want to play. But the executives at the top of the chain of all these major companies, they're the ones sat huddled around, projecting out. I'm going to spend 3 years making this game. Is this game actually going to be in vogue? Is this kind of game going to be in vogue 3 years from now? It's a crystal ball thing, and I think that's what makes it so challenging, fundamentally, to make a game that you think is going to be successful. Because I mean, a lot of these these indie games, there's so many out there, but it requires a big factor in success is, can you capture like influencer awareness, and they bring their audiences into it.
So like games like Tetris Effect, which people adored and really thought worked really well. But then, of course, for every Tetris Effect, you're going to have 3 or 4 other games that tries to get that nostalgia, especially in the indie market, that don't work. and it's like a crystal ball of what's going to work this year. Or look at movies. The same thing with movies. Okay, let's make the sequel. It's going to work. Is the first one was so it flopped. Why did it flop? The last one worked so well like 2 years ago. You never know, and it's really hard to predict. Who knew Greatest Showman was going to be a $500 million film? It opened at 8 million. It opened very low, made 500 million. Who knew that Independence Day 2 was going to make 300 million only and really underperform? No one.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I remember doing an interview with an indie studio that was two guys from South Africa that moved to New York. They spent all their capital on making this sort of side-scrolling, beautifully art, really cool gameplay, side-scrolling thing. Invested all their money in it on day one. I think they said that they sold $400 on day one, which is a disaster because that means it's not going to go anywhere. So they're bemoaning their situation and what's happened and what are they going to do. And they're sat in the apartment, and one of them says, "You know what? I could do a game about pooping out the window and it'd do better than that." So they made a game about pooping out of the window, and it did millions. So
who'd have thought a game like The Binding of Isaac, which if you read the description, your parents might get really mad at you, would do well. The best way to describe it, it's a magic ball industry. You don't know. You just redo the magic 8 ball and roll the dice and hope it works. There's a few sure bets, or at least close enough sure bets, but it's really hard to predict. When Mass Effect first came out, they didn't know it was going to be that big. They had no idea.
Right.
It's
that's why pinning the Star Wars brand to a AAA game is such a risk, because the investment has got to be so significant. And the cachet is, middling. Fans and skeptics, and so it's a huge risk.
Isn't that what the most recent one, when they canceled what EA Vancouver was working on? Then they say they're going to work on something smaller rather than something as big as they were doing that was going to come out in a few years. Work on something smaller that's coming out next year, I believe is what they said.
Yeah, and then the design of those kind of things is likely to have hooks to make quickly produced follow-ons or additions that can then expand it out into the bigger things. So ultimately, 3 years down the road, you might have what, if it was packaged in one, would be considered a AAA game. But at least it allows you to do something at a reasonable budget in a timely manner for what's going on sort of right now. And then, but add in the hooks that allow you to add on quickly and efficiently that expand it out.
And it also helps because then you'll at least get something released and get money coming in on that license to be able to fund other things. Because right now, I don't think Battlefront 2 is printing money. It's still going, it still exists, and they're releasing content. They have released Count Dooku announced the other day, but it's not printing the money that they probably would have hoped, and that's probably slowing some things down the pipeline, because you can't make games without money, and you have to have games released to make that money to keep the cycle going, or else it's going to be like when Lucasfilm was under George Lucas. They released one movie every 3 years because they put their money into it, and they made it, released it, and pushed money into the next one. They're not like Disney that has tons of money and can release tons of things to different studios at the same time. They just don't do that. And with a Star Wars license, I'm quite sure they're trying to keep that money I don't know if it's totally true, but keep as much of that money contained in that system as possible, versus hoping that every other game can feed a Star Wars license that's not making a money right now.
Yeah, it's a complicated business.
And then, mobile, it can be big, it can be small, but it also can be really, at least Star Wars has been on mobile long enough, but Nintendo releases games on mobile and people are decently happy. Blizzard releases the game on mobile and people just flip their lids and freak out. Yeah, even mobile isn't necessarily a safe place for them to do stuff now. Though they do have some good games on there, like that like the R2 puzzle one. Those are easy games
Yep.
to do, and they're fun, and they make
Yep.
money.
Yeah, and with those business models of microtransactions and all that kind of thing, it provides, as you say, it provides opportunity for income to support ongoing content creation, whether it's for that game or for something else.
So I guess last question, since you're someone who's worked in the industry versus people just speculating about it, do you think the term microtransaction they're going to be more careful on how they use it in the future after what happened with Battlefront 2? Did that really shake things, how they evaluate how they're going to use that system for the future, or is it just a temporary, pause?
I think I think it's an evolving process because, Fortnite has the problem is that Fortnite has probably messed up a lot of that conversation because people are paying $20 for
Or
a skin.
$1,800 of their parents' money and have to get refunded because
Right, exactly. And so, that has really kind of upset the apple cart of the business model because, you know, everybody would want a piece of that. I think that format is going to have to evolve. And I know that, a couple of big companies have tried different models of that right balance between flooding little bits of content in that you're paying, $1 here or there, and or sort of having a bigger situation where somebody'd pay, another $30 because they're going to get all of this other content. So there's going to be a few different, I think, test formats of how to approach it that will, change the language away from microtransactions into something sort of more content driven.
Because even the season pass model is seeming to go away now. It's more and more games are coming out without the season pass, and even that seems to be losing its sting as they're. I guess Anthem is one of the first test ones to see how they're going to try a new model and see how that works.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's going to try something and see what bites. And again, you're speculating the future of what an evolving gaming audience is going to accept and buy into, literally buy into.
Well, I think this is a good place to wrap it up. And, we know for sure at least one Star Wars title is far enough along that they're hopefully going to talk about it sometime soonish. Respawn.
Yep, possibly E3.
Yeah, because we know it's at least far enough along that they've spent multiple years on it, which in gaming terms means it's probably almost ready to show something. But the timing on that one, Disney's very meticulous with their timing. Very, very meticulous. So I'm assuming we might see something at Celebration. Honestly, we might. That's in April.
Right.
Yeah, we could.
That would be a place to do it, but then that gets down to deadlines. Is the build sort of ready for that? If we've missed Celebration, we've got E3, or if we miss that, where do we?
I could see a trailer at Celebration, or at least saying here's what this game's about, or ish, and then E3 showing a little more. But of course, I guess EA does its own thing before E3, so.
Well, yeah. Well, by E3, I mean yes, that sort of
player.
The all new E3 that everybody is that has changed significantly.
Well, one thing for sure, it's not a PlayStation exclusive because they're not there at E3, and if it was, they'd be there. Hopefully we'll see something of that one, and people can call. But otherwise, we do have Star Wars games out there. Battlefront's still there. The Old Republic is still there. There are mobile games. They are actually making new mobile games as they come along. Who knows with Lego? That's a different beast. But that really caught me off guard. I didn't realize that they hadn't made any more Lego games since The Force Awakens. And Sounds weird to me. But who knows? They might be waiting for episode 9 and then do the trilogy as one. They've done that before.
Yeah, that would definitely make sense.
And then Rogue One is like an expansion thing you could buy on with a season pass, like they've done with Batman and so on. So, but thank you so much for your time. This adds a lot of insight with someone who actually works in the industry, because a lot of us discuss games, a lot of us think we know what we're talking about, but as most of us are not Jason Schreier on Kotaku, so most of us don't know how to dig deep as I don't know how he gets half of what he does, but whatever it is, he writes some good stuff. But it's awesome to have someone who's actually in the industry who can help explain some things, because otherwise we just kind of whine, and we don't like that. It's too much whining when it comes to Star Wars right now, and I'd rather at least have an informed opinion versus wah.
Well, I'm speculating as much as the next guy on the internet, but yeah, it is fun to speculate and try and predict and not.
But at least your speculation is an industry-informed one, where you know how the industry works, versus those of us who think we know how the industry works because we read about it on random websites.
Well, you would think.
But thank you so much for your time. This has been great. And do you have any projects, books, or anything coming out in the near future that you'd like to point people to? Anything like that that's coming out?
No, I actually don't. Working on some stuff, and I'll let you know.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to seeing what your next project's going to be, because you've worked